afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Addendum with me, your host, Imperial Dane, Master of Propaganda, Hero of Sight, Defender of the Fatherland. I'll here to discuss a topic that I mentioned in the survey video, which is basically morale mechanics. Sort of want to be talking about this for a bit there. So, morale mechanics. I mean, what can they add to the game you might want? I mean, I always sort of mentioned a bit there, but overall, what it could do, is just help offset, some of the less desirable elements of the game, like, for example, blobbing, by just adding, a mechanic that in a sense could punish it, because, morale mechanics could that way, add some kind of shock effect. So when units just blob up and they begin taking losses, all of a sudden the entire unit or blob is that affected more negatively, thusly overall diminishing the benefits of blobbing, because that's generally what blobbing comes down to. There's just a huge advantage just hitting everything at one point, and just swarming it with raw firepower. In that sense, the mechanics aren't quite there for punishing, and that's in a sense all there what morale mechanics should do. Of course, you then have to imagine, well, how would morale work? What would exactly do? In that sense, you have the positive and negative morale. And over what the morale would do is you'd have sort of a base level, you would just perform like it normally does. At high levels of morale, the unit begin performing better, moving a bit faster, having a slightly higher rate of fire, accuracy, something like that. And at less morale, it begins moving slower. And also, begins shooting slower. Begins performing less amazingly. Told to the bound of there, for example, where it might even, depending on the type of unit, begin retreating. If, say, comes under sufficient fire, it might just break up on its own and retreat automatically, because it's just no fun anymore. So with that, all of a sudden, the blobs there would suddenly become a lot more punished, because these effects then would suddenly spread out a lot faster throughout the unit compared to just, more spread out tactically. One unit to lose units, great, but suddenly if they're sort of bunched up, the morale effect, just even losing one member, could suddenly become amplified, as all of the squads would then suffer it, and that way could quickly pile up. And of course would be one way, just losing morale, suffering losses. Machine gun fire, of course, running into that could be another series. Mines or sniper fire. I mean, that would sort of give the sniper more of an actual role, rather than just being the guy, Call of Duty 360 no-scopes it throughout the entire match. He's suddenly becoming much more of a morale weapon. One shot is going to freak out most units, in particular, say, less advanced units. Of course, we can also talk into the sort of further differentiations of morale. And all of a sudden, again, there's these, morale elements, ways to modified. And of course, positive modifiers could just be being back at base, they'll at least be topped up back to sort of reasonable levels, but it could be officers, squad lead upgrades. Veterancy could also be another way, just sort of making, them more tougher down the road. More veteran unit is going to perform better down the road as well. They have seen it, they have survived the baptism of fire. And in that way, you could sort of even have represented like sort of tiers of morale, sort of having like a bit like a health bar, but there'd be sort of like smaller bars within, for morale, like, this is that way you could sort of slowly see the morale being depleted and then sort of go through the different tiers. And that way you could sort of further differentiate between, conscript units, regular units, elite units. By that, for example, they'll have more tiers, like, for example, a raw conscript unit, for example, they'll have like 3 or 2 bars, so they can quickly sort of head into their best, but even that's not going to be amazing. But on the other hand, of course, they also more quickly just dive in to the west, but they're just going to be not very combat effective. Comparatively, you might take, say, some like stormtroopers, rangers, or commanders, and they'll have a lot more tiers with a lot more bonuses. But at the same time, that also means that to an extent it's going to take more harder to get them really excited, like raw. But it's also going to take them a lot more to be broken. Like, it's going to take them more to be worn down morale-wise. They can suffer from more. They can take more of a morale beating alongside everything else. And that way you could also, differentiate between elite and less elite units. And that way, again, you could also reward better play with them. Because, again, even if you misuse your elite units, at some point, it's going to perform rubbish. Whereas, again, you use it really well. Again, it's going to perform well, and that could also be a way that morale could then sort of be a system that rewards a player for actually playing well, for not just preserving his units well, but actually playing them intelligently, trying for more flanks, using more tactical elements, rather than just relying on raw numbers, raw force, and charging straight ahead in B-lines. That way, there could be sort of more incentives for playing the game in a slightly more neater manner. And that way, maybe could be used to teach players how to better play the game, because all of a sudden there's like more tangible rewards, actually not playing like a sack of biscuits. And that way, I think, the game could also thusly benefit. Again, we just suddenly, have almost like another dimension added to all of the units, because you could even apply this to vehicles and tanks. I mean, that way you could just also further add a difference between, say, German and Allied armor, besides, just German tanks, have more armor, bigger guns. And at the same time, you can maybe sort of balance out where the Allies actually have larger numbers, but then again, all of those, Allied tanks will not be, say, as amazingly well trained and sort of in terms of morale as good as the German tanks. I mean, that way, for example, you can sort of differentiate between, your average Brad Pitt, Fury, Sherman tank versus, the Wittmann Tiger Ace. Imagine again like a veteran free Tiger, then highest level of veterans could be performing a lot different from, say, your regular Sherman tank, even with an Easy 8 with veteran free and then high morale. There could be some bigger things there going on. So that could be, a different way. They've also just further differentiating the factions, how they work, giving them more room, more options. Allow factions that require larger numbers to have it, but also then, of course, applying more systemic things. And, of course, the factions that are not supposed to rely so much on huge numbers then sort of got systemic things that work towards that. So that would, add a lot. Plus, you can sort of give it visual cues, units that are sort of great morale, seem a lot more tougher. Tanks, will have their hatches open, the crew will be instinctively looking around, whereas again, if they're not so great morale, they'll be sort of creeping about, they won't be looking as confident. And similarly, tank crews will be all buttoned up, they'll be sort of, very nervous. There'll be audio cues as well, yeah, I'm not poking my head out there, the kraut's gonna take it off, compared to, yeah, let's roll some krauts over, man. I can't wait to steam me some kraut. I mean, that can be that way. Also further ways, and just add more to what I think is actually also one of the less talked about elements of company use, but the human element. That's one thing I also loved about company use, because most RTS games tend to suck at the human element. Like, they tend not to regard the human element as anything. Tank crews, as non-existent. It's just the tanks somehow are self-propelled and have a voice. Infantry, again, is just, a collection of meat sacks moving about. They don't use cover. They don't use anything advanced. They're just meat sacks that are somehow self-propelled. I mean, again, that's sort of comes with the infantry doing better, and the tanks also slow moving than particularly the Americans who do have crews. But again, all of a sudden, with morale, we could further enhance the human element of company heroes, and then possibly in a way, again, that is while adding complexity in the background, doesn't necessarily add a lot more management up front. I mean, again, if a simple morale system is done correctly, it's not going to be something you have to turn and twist a lot of dials to get to work. It's just alright, this unit's in poor morale, I'm going to pull it back for a brief while to recuperate, or I'm going to call up an officer to have a really nice chat with them, or if you're playing the Soviets, I'm going to have a nice commissar move up and shoot someone to encourage the rest. Well, obviously not like that, but give them a nice beating with a very large stick. So those could be ways as well to that way enhance the game, enhance the factions, enhance the flavor, but overall just maybe give some more tools for all players, and just I think something that could very quickly end up being reasonably interesting and exciting. And again, not again just adding some really complex systems that will only work on certain maps, like they did with Cold Tech, which sort of ended up being not quite as practical. Whereas again, I think morale system correctly done, morale mechanics could do that, add another element, another dimension to infantry armor and all that, and of course open up room for a lot more things, but at the same time possibly even work as a teaching tool, because again, morale then could also then be a difference here, telling you, alright, I'm apparently doing pretty badly because all my men are badly demoralized. Maybe I should change my tactics rather than just constantly running straight at the enemy. For example, here, these panzer facilities would probably be in a pretty poor state morale-wise, because they just saw a lot of the men getting blown up and they're all bunched together, so they clearly saw it. Like, there's no excuses there. So those could be ways of just, adding to the game, and thusly, I do think morale mechanics would be a great addition if done intelligently, and again, just sort of done in a minute way that again just sort of works more rewarding effects, and just giving small bonuses that way, then slowly move up, and of course small debuffs if they do not perform well. In theory, you could even add like a special ability for like when they're veteran free and they get max morale, like some kind of like hero ability. That way, use company of heroes like heroism of some sort. Like a tank might get really amazing shot, like the Tiger tank could get like a kill shot with a huge kill dart. Cooldown. If again it's veteran free, it's got full morale, sure, you can get that fucking awesome sweet kill shot, but again, it requires you to get there all the way in the first place. It's not just something you're going to do right every single time. And of course, with tanks, things that could lower their morale bar would be anti-infantry weapons, anti-tank fire, mines. So that could also be in a way. Then that, of course, would encourage you to support your tanks with infantry. In fact, that could be a small morale booster for tanks just having infantry nearby. Lastly, in a sort of organic matter, you're then encouraging combined arms. Hey, that's amazing. So again, morale system overall done correctly could add a lot of depth to the game, a lot of complexity. But again, nothing that sort of really forces you to manage a lot more. Not you have to suddenly juggle a lot more balls. Just essentially just adding another layer that is reasonably easy to manage, I think, for most players once sort of get into it. Personally, I mean, it could be wrong, it could turn out to be a complete mess, but I'd rather prefer to be hopeful in these cases rather than pessimistic, because if you're never going to try out something, you're never going to find out. And that's also a pretty good tip for how to play company here. Sometimes you're just going to push it and see what happens. I mean, you're never going to find out if you never sort of try to get around that corner at times. So there you go, a little video on morale mechanics, my thoughts on them, and what I think they could bring to Companies 3 if they get around to adding it there, and certainly I would personally hope they do so. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, hope you liked it. If you did, subscribe, like, share, comment on it. If you like what I do consider donating or pledging on Patreon. Links in the video description. Big thanks to all of those who already do pledge on Patreon and already have donated. You're all wonderful people, and certainly what allow me to keep doing this. So thank you all, and see you all another time. Cheers.